The Six-Day War of 1967 was a pivotal event in the history of the Middle East. In the weeks leading up to the war, 4 Arab armies gathered near Israel's borders, openly threatening the annihilation of the Jewish state. Yet in only 6 days, Israel pushed these armies back and captured new territory that made it much less vulnerable to future attacks. After the war, Israel offered to trade much of this land for peace with the Arab countries, but they refused to negotiate peace with Israel. Many of the dilemmas that Israel faces today had their beginnings at this critical time. In this series of video posts over the next month, we will relive these dramatic events that took place 50 years ago today. In May of 1967, Israel stood in a precarious position. It was not the strong country that it is today. Only 19 years earlier, it had barely survived its war of independence. In that war, 5 Arab armies had simultaneously invaded in an effort to prevent the creation of a Jewish state. Yet the Israelis fought back and were able to reclaim sovereignty over their ancient homeland, establishing a nation-state for the Jewish people after 2,000 years of exile and periods of persecution. The War of Independence ended in 1949, but Arab rejection of Israel had produced continued terrorism from 3 borders. To Israel's north, from the Golan Heights, Syria shelled Jewish communities in the valley below on a regular basis. In the south and east, Arab terrorists from the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip and the Jordanian-controlled West Bank regularly infiltrated across the border, carrying out attacks against civilians and killing over 400 Israelis over the course of 19 years. At its narrowest point, Israel was only 9 miles wide and vulnerable to an attack from Jordan that could cut the country in half. Its supply of water was also under threat. Beginning in 1964, the Syrians had been trying to divert the flow of Israel's critical water source, the Jordan River. On May 11th, after a series of terrorist attacks, UN Secretary General U Thant stated that attacks on Israel were, quote, deplorable, insidious, contrary to the letter and spirit of the armistice agreements, and menaces to peace in the area. Israel had faced these threats since its birth. Long before the Six-Day War and before Israel had control of the West Bank, its Arab neighbors had rejected Israel's right to exist. To the Arab world, Israel's borders, the ceasefire lines of 1949, were simply the points where the war was paused, to be resumed at any moment. That moment was approaching.